to share your lunch with me today. It is my delight, privilege, and honor to be here to chat about what is proving to be a challenging time for all of us. But by the end of our program, hopefully we will all have a little bit different perspective and maybe start to seek some of the possibilities and opportunities in this moment as well. As Judy noted, which I'm trying to figure out how to move this program along. Here we go. As Judy noted, my name is Jane Barton. I serve as an educational consultant, and my company is Cardinal LLC. I'm certainly appreciative of the sponsorship of AARP Colorado, as well as Colorado Respite Coalition. I do a tremendous amount of programming related to caregiving, because that's one of my passions. So you'll have some resources in the handout that is associated with the program today related to caregiving, in case you have that interest as well. So as an educational consultant, every day I have the delight to do what I love. I can serve as a speaker, a writer, and/or a listener. And my areas of expertise include aging, caregiving, and end-of-life care. Now in the handout, if you choose to download it, it gives you a detailed background on my professional world. I do have a background in hospice and palliative care, and then I have a rather checkered past that includes a career in finance and also the oil patch. So it's a rather circuitous route that brought me to the work that I love. And so today, I'm very excited to be talking to you about a topic that always comes to bear, whether I'm working with caregivers, talking about aging in general, or certainly working with folks around end-of-life issues. And that is change and uncertainty. And what we're going to recognize today is that basically is life. And even though today we are dealing with dramatic changes and very difficult transitions, life has always been uncertain. Life has always been ever-changing. We were just living with the illusion that perhaps we were in control a little bit more than we are today. And so we are dealing with change, and there is more change ahead. So for our time together today, these are going to be the points of discussion. First, we're going to highlight the changes prompted by COVID-19. And this will not be a comprehensive list. You can certainly add to it. Secondly, we'll recognize why we are typically resistant to change. And I'll share with you some research by Robert Kagan out of Harvard. Thirdly, we'll explore the process of change to understand how change actually happens and how it unfolds. And again, an expert that will be brought forward will be William Bridges. And then finally, we're going to discuss what I call the 3 R's to deal with change and uncertainty. 3 tools that you can have in your back pocket that you can leverage when change seems to be daunting or problematic. And again, it's not the only way of coping with change, but there are 3 R's that I use almost on a daily basis. So let's begin by talking about the landscape in which we live, the times in which we live. Now, I don't know about you, but there are days I wake up and I think, what just happened? What just happened? It seems as if my life has been turned upside down. Now, I've heard this phraseology used on TV, on the internet. It's written about in journal articles. But it seems as if our world is topsy-turvy and nothing seems normal anymore. And if you're feeling this way, realize that you are in very good company. And it seems as if we skipped a slide, but that's okay. Our world has changed seemingly in an instant. I remember back in January, which seems a lifetime ago now, but I remember looking at 2020, and I always do my annual resolutions. And so I have my goals and objectives. And I did not have any clue that this is what would happen. And so when I think back to January, it is such a different frame of reference. It was such a different time. And so that instantaneous change, that unexpected detour due to COVID-19 has pushed us into uncharted waters. And oftentimes when we are in these unknown seas, the waves are rocking and rolling, we haven't charted our own course, and we seem to be blown around on a daily basis by the vagaries of the winds that are blowing. So we are going through the proverbial domino effect right now. Just when we think we have things under control, a little bit of stability, something else happens. Maybe it's a little change, maybe it's a big change. but one change seemingly leads to another. And so that is one reason I think we are all so exhausted. We are going through what is called change fatigue. Now, this is a term usually reserved for organizational change, but I think it is very appropriate for individuals as well as families and smaller communities to recognize when you can't accommodate, adapt, and conform to a change before another change happens, it is going to be tiring. And if you are feeling fatigued, perhaps this is one of the reasons why. Every day we are learning how to live differently in this changing world. And depending on your particular circumstances, your family system, and whether you are still working or not, some of those changes include working from home. Now, it's interesting. I've talked to some of my friends and colleagues, and for years they were wishing, oh, I wish I could work from home. I could just throw on my sweats and a t-shirt, put a ball cap on, and I could work from the convenience of my own study. Well, it's not working out, I think, as well as they had hoped for in this day and time, because in addition to working from home, we're also adjusting to family being at home 24/7. So if you reside with other people, when we were mandated to stay at home, now we're trying to establish new roles and responsibilities and establish new personal boundaries. And that's in light of working from home as well. And if you have kids or grandkids in your home, another challenge is schooling children at home. I have some younger friends who have teenage children and younger, and this is one of their greatest challenges, to motivate their kids to get online, to do their assignments, and to learn their lessons. I think they also have an enhanced appreciation of teachers in our world today as well, because this is tough. This is one of their greatest stressors from day to day. Additionally, we're all learning how to deal with physical isolation and the subsequent loneliness. Now, in the last 2 or 3 years, I've done a lot of training on the epidemic of loneliness. Well before COVID, it was recognized that chronic loneliness was a major health risk factor for individuals who were living alone or feeling alone. And so the stay-at-home order, this social distancing, has served to magnify our sensation of loneliness in the world as well. So with all of these changes and so many others that you can add to the list, it's hard to maintain our balance physically, emotionally, and mentally. And oftentimes this is because this is an unknown journey for all concerned. I can probably safely say that no one on this call today has ever experienced a pandemic before. And so we are on a path, we are on a trail, we're on a journey that is ill-defined, and it looks a little foggy as we move forward. And so there's a tremendous sense of uncertainty. We don't know exactly where we're headed. And so when we have this sensation of unknowing and uncertainty, it's frightening. When we lack data, when we lack information, we start to fill in those gaps with fear and anxiety. Now, the thing to keep in mind, even though we are going through a tremendous time of change, all kinds of changes, this is not the first time we've been through change and the subsequent transitions afterwards. Life is a continuous process of change if we choose to see it that way. So we can look back on previous experience and recognize the only constant in life is change. And so although we have a lot of changes today, there are going to be more changes ahead. Now, with that in mind, you would think that we should be well schooled in the nature of change, right? If we understand that the moment we popped out of the womb, someone patted us on the bottom, we took that first intake of breath, we ourselves initiated a cellular progression of change, which is called aging. If we recognize that fact and realize that from that point forward, then we started to change as individuals going through the various stages of human development, we can recognize that as well. It's still difficult to deal with change. And I've done so many programs on change in the past, and I usually ask the audience, how many of you enjoy change? And people furrow their brow and they start to shake their head or they look down at their feet because they don't like change. And that usually is the typical reaction for human beings. Instead of being well schooled in change, we are resistant. Now that begs the question, why? Why are we resistant to change? Well, according to Robert Kagan, an expert out of Harvard who has published on this issue of change and transition for decades, he believes it's because we have an ingrained immunity to change. And he goes throughout this book to share his evidence, the longitudinal studies that he has conducted over the past 20 years, to give support to his premise that just like when a human being is born as a baby, they slowly develop an immunity to fight off disease. The same is true for an immunity to change. When we are born, as we start to mature as an individual, as a human being, we start to develop an immunity to change to fight off anything that will disrupt our sense of normalcy. And so Kagan goes on to argue that we are resistant to change because we want to hang on to the status quo. We want to hang on to our sense of normalcy. We want to embrace the known because that is our comfort zone. And so when life gets off track, when we deviate from that normal, from that known, that is destabilizing in so many different ways, as we already noted, physiologically, mentally, spiritually, and psychosocially. We also fear losing control when life gets off track, again, because we feel uncertain and we feel like we are not at the helm of our own ship. And we dislike contemplating an uncertain future because, again, we don't know where we are headed. So the reality today is that change is our collective reality. And I think this is what is enhancing perhaps our discomfort with what's going on. Usually, if I'm going through a major life change, I can go to my family and friends, to my trusted colleagues, and I can process what's going on in my life. Well, today, because this is a global phenomenon, all of us are experiencing change at different levels, depending on the specifics of our lived experience. We're all struggling. And so when I call up a friend or I contact a colleague and I may be in a real pickle one day, they may be struggling with their own issues around change. They may be despairing over what's going on. And so our support system may not be as strong as it has been because everybody's challenged. Everybody is struggling today. Now, I'm just full of good news today because even though we've had a lot of change up until now, there's even more change ahead, which I think magnifies the importance of understanding this process of change. So let's consider what mitigates our fear of change so that we can be more proactive in this journey. We can feel as if we have a little bit of control of the next step and the next step. So what mitigates our fear and what inspires us to confront the uncertainty of the world today? Well, the answer to both of these questions for me, I think the first step is knowledge. And that is true for almost everything in life and where we feel uncertain or we're heading into the unknown. Tease out all the information you can so that you can make informed decisions around the next step and the trajectory of your life from this point forward. So let's gain some knowledge about this whole process of change. Let's strive to understand it. And the comments that I'm going to make regarding this whole process of change, I have been informed by the work of William Bridges, who was an expert in organizational change, and I believe he died in 2014. But prior to his death, he wrote many books, and several of those are noted in the bibliography associated with your handout. But he was a phenomenal presence in helping people to understand just what change is all about. And so what I learned from him is this. When I think about change, I think of the process in this way. So imagine that you are in a time in your life when everything is going perfectly. Now, these moments are few and far between, so savor this moment. But when that is occurring, it's as if you are sailing through life on a sea of tranquility. There are no waves, there are no ripples. You have charted your course and you are headed in the quote unquote right direction. And then something happens, and that something is change. Now, change, as described by William Bridges, is a situational shift. Boom, something happens. And it's as if someone or something has dropped a boulder in your sea of tranquility. And instead of being serene and calm, now the waters are rocking and rolling and the waves are crashing on the shore. And this is frightening. It's destabilizing. Now, the magnitude of the wave will be directly proportional to the magnitude of the change. And so for small changes, you're going to have a ripple effect. And you can easily navigate that. You can find your sea legs quickly and move on with life. But when the changes are big, they generate waves, the magnitude of a tsunami, that threaten to knock the props out of your foundation, to change your life forever. Now, I think we can all agree that the change we experienced with the advent of COVID in the world today, this has been a big change. And it has generated waves that have been hitting the shores of every country in the world. It's rocking and rolling our global population. Now, the other thing that William Bridges points out, which is vitally important to recognize, is that in this whole process of change, we don't fear change, because oftentimes we don't even know change is about to happen. Remember, that's a situational shift. So in 2020, in January, when I was writing my resolutions for the new year, I was not sitting back in fear thinking we were going to have a pandemic. I had no clue this was going to happen. So I was not in fear of that change. When fear arises is in the aftermath of change, which is what Bridges refers to as transitions. We fear the turbulence of transitions. And that is where we are today. We are in the aftermath of the initial big change of COVID, and we're also dealing with all the subsequent changes and transitions that followed. We're trying to figure out, okay, this happened. Now what are we going to do about it? It's during the transitional time that our stability is threatened. Our world has been turned upside down. It's during the transitions in which nothing seems normal. And normal never seemed so attractive to most of us these days. And this is when you start hearing people say, I long to go back to what was. I long to feel normal again. Now, I've heard many a reporter use this phrase. I've talked to friends and family and colleagues saying, oh, I want to go back to normal. But as far as the reality of the process of change, here is a fact that we all need to learn how to deal with and to accept. There is no going back to normal. That is not a possibility, because life is forever changed in the aftermath of change. I can't go back to the way I used to live in January of 2020. It is not a possibility. And how I view life is forever changed. I may have realigned my priorities and my values. I may have different dreams and hopes for the future, predicated on what has just happened to all of us. So we can't go back. Instead, we are prompted, we are invited, perhaps we are compelled to consider, now what? This is our reality. What do we do now? Well, the invitation that I hope that you will consider, and one that I have considered as well, instead of resisting or denying what has just happened, embrace this change. Now, I don't mean that we have to be happy about it. It doesn't mean that we go, oh, woohoo, I'm so glad we're in the middle of a pandemic. But we embrace this as our reality. And so we can lean into it. We can learn about it, and we can plan for it. And by so doing, we can establish realistic expectations of the journey. And a realistic expectation is not going back to normal. It's moving forward and creating a new normal. Now, for me, when I start to consider this process of change As you can tell by all the pictures that I use in my presentation, I think in images and I love metaphors. And so I want to share with you a metaphor for this process of change that may help you to figure out where you are in this process of change and transition. And it's a model that I call bridge time. Now, bridge time, the story that goes with this, goes something like this. So imagine you awaken today, and just like we talked about living in a sea of tranquility, imagine that everything was going exactly as planned for you today for the first 2 or 3 hours. And so as you journey through the day, you're on a path that is smooth and it's straight, and you feel confident that you're in control. And then you see a detour sign, and you take a sharp right turn, and a few steps after that turn, you recognize your path is no longer flat. In fact, you have reached a point of inflection, and your path has become quite steep, and it's harder to walk. Now, that point of inflection, represented by the left side of the bridge, that represents change, that situational shift. Something happened in your life, and now things are a bit harder. As you stand at the entry point to a bridge, you hear a roaring sound, and you look a little bit further ahead, and you realize there's a huge canyon before you. And you peer over the edge, and you see turbulent waters, rapids. These are the turbulent waters of transition, and they are frightening. And you're wondering, how am I going to get across this canyon? And you raise your eyes and you see the bridge again, and you realize this is a bridge that affords you safe passage from what was to what will be. You also recognize it's a very narrow bridge. It's one way. And once you step onto that bridge, you will not have the opportunity to go back. You will take one step after another that will lead you to a new way of being. Now, this all sounds lovely, and this model looks great, but what we have to recognize is that on these transitional bridges of life, we are required to do a lot of hard work. And some of that hard work is overcoming our fear and our anxiety about the unknown and uncertainty. But it's also grieving and mourning what we just lost. Because change by definition means something ended. A way of life, a sense of security, a life, a relationship, a job. And with a sense of loss, we grieve. And we need to do something with that grief, which is mourning, integrating that loss into the fabric of our being. So these transitional bridges, on which we have been many times before, they're always hard because we have a lot of hard work to do. So these transitional times, they are filled with the unknown and with uncertainty and with a lot of grief and loss. And so the path may look a little bit daunting, a little frightening, and we can't always see to the opposite end of that bridge. We don't know exactly where we are going. And so that is why transitions require a tremendous amount of courage, a tremendous amount of faith, and a tremendous amount of belief in what we are capable of doing. So it's no wonder we resist change, because this is tough stuff, not to be minimized, not to be diminished. So if the reality is that the only constant in life is change, if the reality is we are living in the aftermath of a very significant change, the introduction of COVID into the world, how in the world are we going to cross this transitional bridge and all the bridges yet to come? Well, this is where I would like to offer a few suggestions, and certainly you can add to the list. But I want to explain to you what I mean by the 3 R's to guide your journey. The first being resilience, the second being our response to life, and the third being ritual. So let's begin by talking about resilience. In order to transition from what was to what will be, we got to have bounce. Now, what do I mean by bounce? Well, the American Psychological Association defines resilience as a process of adapting well in the face of adversity. It means bouncing back from difficult experiences. Now, I have used this definition probably for the last 10 to 12 years when I've done programming on resilience in general. But I came across a different view of resilience over the last 2 to 3 weeks when I was reading a book called Type R, and it's written by a mother-daughter research team. And their perspective on resilience, I think, ties very well into our model of change and transition. They talk about transformative resilience, and they define this as the difference between those who fold and those who flourish. So transformative resilience is the ability to learn, grow, and spring forward. Now, it's still the same premise as the previous definition I gave you, but I want to stay congruent and I want to stay consistent in this idea of moving forward instead of bouncing back. So let's talk about how we spring forward, how we can be resilient in the aftermath of the COVID change. So in order to do this, I want to highlight some of the essential ingredients to spring forward. What does it take? Well, first and foremost, I think we need to perceive this challenge also as an open door to possibilities. Now, if we can see possibilities and opportunities during the darkest times of our life, it shows that we still have hope, that we are still somewhat optimistic about life. And in all the work that I've reviewed that's been published by individuals such as Stephen Southwick, Brene Brown, and many other researchers in the world that focus on this process of resilience, they are all in agreement that optimism is almost mandatory if we are to spring forward, to continue on, to move through these transitions, and to embrace a new way of being. Optimism is the spark that ignites resilience. And I think that's because optimists see life differently than pessimists. Even in the most dire times, optimists can find opportunity in adversity. And this isn't pie in the sky optimism. This is realistic optimism. Now that means assessing your situation realistically, identifying the resources you have at hand, and then becoming an active problem solver, meaning you put a plan together and you identify the first step and the next step and the step beyond that. And despite the losses and the suffering you may be experiencing during times of transition, if you are optimistic, you still perceive life as meaningful. There is still a reason why. You are still serving a purpose in your existence. So optimism is a critically important ingredient for springing forward. Another ingredient is having the ability and sometimes the will to confront your fear and anxiety. I think the fear and the anxiety that bubbles up when we are in these moments of transition can become paralyzing. We can get stuck at the entry point of that metaphorical bridge. And then fear becomes our greatest disability. We are unable or unwilling to move forward. Now, I'm not minimizing the fears or the anxiety that we all are confronting today. There are many fears on the horizon that we have. We have fears about our health, for ourselves, as well as for the people that we love and that we serve. We have fears about our financial health, wondering what is going to happen to our economy. And we have fears about our employment and the businesses that we need to sustain so that we can have a vital and vibrant economy and society. So there are a lot of fears to be addressed, but it doesn't mean we can't overcome those fears. So how do we conquer fear? How do we rise to this occasion? Well, again, it goes back to knowledge, understanding our situation, identifying our resources, and then developing new skills to adapt to a new way of being. Just like today, we are gathered today in a virtual space. Judy noted that this is the 55th Lunch and Learn that she has facilitated. Now that all happened in the aftermath of COVID being introduced into our country. And look how much we have learned in that short period of time and the skills that we've developed. Listening to many of you talk before I started the presentation, I know that I'm in the presence of Zooming pros. So this is a skill that you developed on this transitional bridge. We can also conquer fear through faith. believing in a higher power if you choose to, but also faith in yourself and your abilities and your strength and your boldness, and having faith in the community in which you reside. And then finally, we conquer fear by choosing to move through it. It is an intentional choice. You look it square in the eye and you take the next step and the next step to move beyond it, to live beyond it, to create a life that you love in the aftermath of change. So we have optimism, conquering our fear. There's also an essential ingredient of being true to ourselves, honoring our true north. Now, I think this is vitally important in this day and time when everything seems so abnormal, when everything is so different. When we look out at the world and we wonder what just happened, if we can keep the core of our being pointed to our true north, we can maintain that self-confidence that will allow us to move forward. Now, this always brings to mind a quote from Hamlet that I was weaned on from the time I was a small girl. My mom used to recite this to me. She said, "This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day. Thou canst not then be false to any man." Now, what I've been witnessing in myself and my friends and also online is that this is an opportunity, having been forced to stay at home and having a little extra time, this has been an opportunity for a gut check to make sure that my values are in alignment with my actions, that my priorities actually represent what I believe to be true and what I value the most. And it allows me, I think, to have a greater commitment to following my path to true north. And that is a good thing indeed. Now, another essential ingredient to spring forward is to recognize we're not alone, and so to reach out and to support each other. Now, venues such as this today, this creates a sense of community that is so vitally important when we are asked to stay at home or to shelter in place. Interdependence is a vitally important kind of relationship. It is mutually beneficial to help us recognize that if we are in need, if we need a good listener, if we need some financial support, if we need emotional support, that we have family and friends that we can lean on whenever the need arises. And I think we are all recognizing the importance of community and that we truly are better together. Another essential ingredient is having resilient role models in your life. And perhaps that is as simple as looking around your home, people that you live with currently, or maybe remembering your ancestors, your grandparents or your great-grandparents, remembering the stories they used to tell you of how they survived World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, whatever the situation might have been. And not only marveling at how resilient they were, but recognizing if they were able to spring forward from those challenges, that you have the ingredients, you have the DNA perhaps, to spring forward in the same manner in this time and in this place. These individuals can be that glimmer of hope on the horizon that will inspire you. Emotional agility is also an essential ingredient in this day and time to spring forward. There's a lot of information out there on the internet from Susan David, who published a book several years ago by this same title. And she talks about how we are challenged during tough times and adversity, not to ignore our hard emotions, but to face them. And by facing them, we can process them, which affords us the opportunity to embrace the life-giving emotions, such as love. She describes emotional agility in this way. It isn't about ignoring difficult emotions and thoughts. It's holding those emotions and thoughts loosely, facing them courageously and compassionately, and then moving past them to make big things happen in your life. And so it's not discounting that a lot of us are experiencing anger and fear and frustration and a sense of loss of control, all of these hard things. But emotional agility is having the courage to confront those hard emotions, to deal with them and process them instead of stuffing them and trying to ignore them. Another essential ingredient in the transitional times of life so that we can spring forward is adaptability. And that means we make accommodations to the change and the transition, and we are willing to bend instead of being broken by life. Now, this particular ingredient brings to mind the serenity prayer for me, and it reminds me of what is within my control and what is not. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the hard-earned wisdom to know the difference. Now, I have been repeating this mantra almost on a daily basis over the last 2 months, and it has served me well, because the things that are beyond my control, I need not perseverate on. Instead, I focus on what I can control, and I deal with that hour to hour, day to day. Another ingredient to spring forward is you got to keep a sense of humor. You have got to laugh. And I think this should be on a daily basis, if not hourly basis. Now, it's not laughing at our situation, it's laughing in spite of it. And there is a huge volume of research that's been done over the last 20 years that talks about the physical, the emotional, the psychosocial, and spiritual benefits of laughter. So laughter serves us well. So keep your sense of humor. And sometimes we have to laugh so that we don't cry. I know there is that phraseology as well, but laughter will serve us well. We also need to remember our why of life. This is a fundamental ingredient to springing forward. Knowing your why, having a sense of meaning and purpose day to day, day in and day out. And having that sense of meaning is even more important during the tough times of life. Now, if you've not read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, I highly recommend that you read this classic work. Viktor Frankl was a neurologist as well as a psychiatrist of the 20th century. And this book, he shares his story of 3.5 years in Auschwitz and what he learned from that. And his premise, in fact, his whole career was based on his belief that the driving force for humanity was understanding the meaning of our life. And he was so bold to say that if you have meaning in the midst of adversity and suffering, suffering ceases to be suffering. Now, when he talks about the why of life, the why extends beyond the particular moment of change and loss to incorporate the entirety of our existence. He echoes the sentiment of the existential philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche of the 19th century. He who has a why to live can bear with almost any how. So if you have that undergirding sense of why you are here and what you are about as an individual, as a human being, you can tolerate, you can bear almost anything. Because if you have that sense of why, there is always that little glimmer of hope on the horizon. Now, the final essential ingredient that I want to highlight is foundational faith. However you choose to define faith, could be a religious tradition, spiritual beliefs, your fundamental beliefs in life, humanistic approaches. It's not one size fits all, but it's the litmus test. It's your doctrines that guide you in life. These are the times when we are literally brought to our knees and we are looking to the heavens and asking why. This is when our faith is so profoundly important. Brene Brown defines faith in this way. She says, faith is a place of mystery where we find the courage to believe what we cannot see and the strength to let go of our fear of uncertainty. This is so vitally important. And I've spoken to so many people who are actually in an existential crisis. Their faith has been shaken because what is going on. And that's not always a bad thing. An examined life, an examined faith actually can become stronger than ever before. So I hope you will consider the essential ingredients to spring forward. Now, the bottom line regarding resilience is this. Transformational resilience provides a framework and skills that enable us to use adversity, change, and life's challenges as opportunities for innovation, creativity, growth, and transformation. Now, this is a very different mindset in the midst of a transition. Instead of feeling like a victim of life, we are assuming a little bit of control. We are choosing to view this as an opportunity in which we can grow and evolve and transform and lean into life, moving in a direction where we can choose to create a life that we love. Now, the second guiding light that I want to touch on is response, a chosen response. So in the aftermath of COVID, we have a choice to make. How do we choose to respond to life right now? Now, I think we're all recognizing the reality that we can't control everything that happens in life, but we have the freedom to choose a response. The mother-daughter team, the Marstons, in their book Type R, they noted that although we may not be able to control our external circumstance, one of the magnificent things about human beings is that we can always choose our attitudes. And our attitudes inform our response to life. So consider this question. Through the twists and turns of life, in the midst of this global transition, how do you choose to respond to this situation? Now, if you're not sure how to respond, I'll give you a multiple choice. Are you a carrot, an egg, or a coffee bean? Now, before you answer, I want to read you a story. If I can find my glasses here. Here we go. I want to read you a story about a young woman. And she was having a very difficult time in life. And she went to the wisest person in her world, and that was her grandmother, seeking advice. A young woman went to her grandmother and told her about her life and how things were so hard for her. She didn't know how she was going to make it, and she wanted to give up. She was tired of fighting and struggling. It seemed as one problem was solved, a new one arose. Well, her grandmother took her to the kitchen. She filled 3 pots with water. In the first, she placed carrots. In the second, she placed eggs. And the last, she placed ground coffee beans. She let them sit and boil without saying a word. In about 20 minutes, she turned off the burners. She fished out the carrots, put them in a bowl. She pulled out the eggs, placed them in another bowl. Then she ladled out the coffee and placed it in a cup. Turning to her granddaughter, she asked, "Tell me what you see." The granddaughter rolled her eyes and said, "Carrots, eggs, and coffee." The grandmother brought her closer and asked her to feel the carrots. She did and noted that they had gotten soft. Then she asked her to take an egg and to break it. After pulling off the shell, she observed the hard-boiled egg. Finally, she asked her to sip the coffee. The granddaughter smiled as she tasted its rich flavor. The granddaughter then asked, "What's the point, grandmother?" Her grandmother explained that each of these objects had faced the same adversity, boiling water, but each reacted differently. The carrot went in strong, hard, and unrelenting. However, after being subjected to the boiling water, it softened and became weak. The egg had been fragile. Its thin outer shell had protected its liquid interior, but after sitting through the boiling water, its inside became hardened. The ground coffee beans were unique, however. After they were in the boiling water, they changed the water. "Which are you?" she asked her granddaughter. "When adversity knocks on your door, how do you respond? Are you a carrot, an egg, or a coffee bean?" Now, this is a question I think we should all consider. Am I the carrot that seems strong, but with pain and adversity, do I wilt and become soft and lose my strength? Am I the egg that starts out with a malleable heart, but changes with the heat? Did I have a fluid spirit, but after a death, a breakup, a financial hardship, or a pandemic, have I become hardened and stiff? Does my shell look the same, but inside am I bitter and tough with a stiff spirit and a hardened heart? Or am I like the coffee bean? The bean actually changes the hot water, the very circumstance that brings pain. When the water gets hot, it releases the fragrance and flavor. If you are like the bean, when things are at their worst, you get better and change the situation around you. So, are you a carrot, An egg or a coffee bean? Well, the choice is yours. And it is an important choice for all of us because the choice we make and how we respond to life will lead us on a particular trajectory in life that will determine whether we merely endure the rest of the journey or actually embrace and enjoy life. Now, the last guiding light I want to touch on is ritual. Now, this may seem a little different approach to springing forward, but I find ritual profoundly important on a day-to-day basis during times of change and transition. Now, what do I mean by ritual? What is a ritual? Well, for me, it goes well beyond a strict definition of a religious or a spiritual rite. I love the definition by Thomas More, who describes ritual as any action that speaks to the soul and to the deep imagination. Even the smallest rites of everyday existence are important to the soul. And a ritual is very different than a routine. And I want to give you a distinction by sharing a quick story with you. Now, every day I have a morning routine, and that is going down to the kitchen and making a cup of hot tea. So I put the kettle on, the water boils, I make my cup of tea, I get caffeine into this body, and the day moves on. That is a routine. Now, about once a quarter, I need to ritualize the process of making a cup of tea because I have a very different intention. It's not about getting caffeine into my body. It's about connecting with the memory of my mother. My mother loved hot tea, and we used to share tea every afternoon. So when I want to ritualize it, I go into the kitchen and I get a very special China teapot and a special China tea cup. And I will only brew constant comment tea because that was her favorite tea. And when I have that fragrance of that particular tea in my home, the spices, the orange, I am transported back in time. I am connected to the memories of my mother. I am connected to a sense of the divine. And I'm connected to a sense of meaning and purpose in my life. That is ritual. And that highlights how profoundly important ritual can be during times of change and transition, because ritual satisfies our hunger for the familiar. I can brew that pot of tea with my eyes closed because I know that process so well, and I know the elements that are involved. So it gives me a sense of control. It gives me a sense of the known. Ritual also affords us predictability, order, and continuity. I've always brewed a pot of tea that way, and I always will. So it's an ongoing process that provides comfort and continuity for me. And rituals provide those powerful connections that help to assure us that we're not alone. Rituals help us to connect to that which is beyond ourselves, to the sense of the sacred and the divine if we choose to worship in that way. It also connects us to other people if we ritualize in community. It can serve to connect us to memories like the memory of my mother. And it can connect us to a sense of meaning, which we've already highlighted as an essential ingredient to springing forward, to being resilient. So ritual serves as a lifeline during times that are chaotic and stressful and challenging and fearful. Ritual provides much needed stabilities when the sea is rocking and rolling during times of change and transition. So a question for you today: what rituals guide you today? Not routines, but rituals that you do with the intention of connection, with the intention of being attentive to that process, to connect to the sacred, to memories, to a community, to meaning. Well, if you're lacking in ritual, create one. It doesn't have to be overly involved. It can be 5 seconds, 5 minutes, 5 hours, whatever serves you well. So a few parting notes, and then hopefully we'll have time for some questions. If you are feeling overwhelmed today, And I have had this look on my face several times over the last 2 months. I have a heartfelt invitation for you. Change your mindset. That is the first step. So if you are despairing, if you are being overly pessimistic, remember that optimism is the spark for resilience, for springing forward. So find some point of hope on the horizon. Seek your guiding lights during this challenging time. Choose to discover the open doors in the midst of all of the challenges. Choose to discover the opportunities. Choose to hang on to hope every minute of every day, because that will be the lure that will pull you forward. Choose to believe that the greatest invitations often come through life's biggest interruptions. And the COVID-19 has been one heck of an interruption. And so I am hopeful that we will all discover one heck of an invitation on how to evolve and to transform through this transitional time. So choose to respond to life in life-giving ways. And going back to our story, choose to be a coffee bean in the midst of your circumstance. So a heartfelt closing, I always like to leave you with something else to think about. And I would imagine that many of you have heard the poem by Kitty O'Meara. It's been all over the internet. It's called "And the People Stayed Home." And this is really my hope for all of us. This is how to move through the transition and to evolve and to transform, and for all of us to continue to create a life that we love in better days ahead. And the people stayed home and read books and listened and rested and exercised and made art and played and learned new ways of being and stopped and listened deeper. Someone meditated, someone prayed, someone danced, someone met their shadow, and people began to think differently. And people healed, and in the absence of people who lived in ignorant ways, dangerous, meaninglessness, and heartless, even the earth began to heal. And when the danger ended and the people found each other, they grieved for the dead people, and they made new choices and dreamed new visions and created new ways of life and healed the earth completely, just as they were healed themselves. So I want to close by sharing a few resources for you, certainly not comprehensive, there are more in your handout. But if you're interested in other programs that I'm doing, and I'm doing everything online for the foreseeable future, you can check out my website, go to upcoming events, and it will note the Zoom meetings or the webinars that I'm doing. And also I have a media links page that will take you to some podcasts and videos that I recorded with AARP a few years ago on all aspects of caregiving. More than anything, I just want to thank you for allowing me to share your lunchtime today. I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity. I wish you many blessings on your journey. I know this is a challenging time, but there are opportunities if we choose to seek them, to embrace them and live into them. So if you have any questions, if I can be of help to you, share some resources, do not hesitate to drop me an email at cardinallife@msn.com. I would love to continue the conversation with you. So, any questions?
There aren't questions in the chat other than just, oh my gosh, such gushing thanks and excellent presentation. Does anyone want to come off mute and ask a question or make a comment? Anybody want to raise their hand?
I will.
Okay, go ahead.
It was very moving. I think it was something that we all needed to hear. It's like reassurance. The part that really touched me was the ritual. That really touched me was a simple thing about tea or coffee or, you know, someone in your life. And I think at this time, being at home alone, I didn't realize that this is what I was doing, that I was getting, coming in contact with a ritual. I was just doing it just because. But sitting here and hearing it, it really touched my heart. It really brought it to closure.
Mm.
So I wanted to say thank you.
Oh, you're
Yes.
very welcome. Very welcome.
Yes.
Thanks, Liz. Anybody else? Marilyn?
Yeah, hi. Just want to introduce myself. This was so beautiful. I'm a therapist in the area and I give talks. And this talk just meant so much to me. So it's so nice to be on the other side to hear all this. And I'm very spiritual. And I just want to tell you sunsets. I connect to sunsets. That's a ritual. And I feel they're a part of me and just gives me so much hope and connections to myself and others. And this just seems like the best time for support groups for this. And I would love to provide that for you if anybody wants a support group or if I can further help you all on what you're doing here. I think it's just so beautiful. And it's just a time to become so spiritually awakened and connect to the bigger picture in each of us that I've been looking for all this, I think, for a long time. And this is just a beautiful way to get through this, I think, to have this and have connections and support.
Well, I'll think of you at sunset tonight, Marilyn.
Thank you. So nice to meet you. Oh, I'm so happy.
Anyone else? You know, we've been meeting on these calls at 11:30 Mountain Time every day since March 16th, and Monday through Friday, and it has become a ritual for those of us who've been consistently on these calls, and it really has meant the world. I think I know myself and others have expressed that too. So it's that break in the day that sometimes is very difficult. And we're going to be also having Sarah Zeph Geber talk about solo aging coming up in June, because the people, those of us who are, have family with them versus those who are isolated in a circumstance where they're alone, so I think that the incorporation of what Jane was talking about and these rituals and this shift in mindset can be really valuable for all of us. And to have the ability, I think, Marilyn, to, we do sort of have a support group in this sense of a consistent meaning. Many of you are new to the call today, but for those who come on every day, just about, it's been incredibly valuable. So I highly recommend that community, that sense of community that you can get from, in using video conferencing technology to do that at this point, really is working and important.
Wonderful.
Go ahead, Jermaine.
I just want to compliment Jane and everyone on this wonderful presentation. I've been a person in all my life who relishes change. I mean, I worked in an industry that commanded that and I embraced it for many, many years. But now I'm in this situation where I'm paranoid about furthering my own lifestyle going forward. And I'm having a conflict within my own brain about changing my mindset to be able to forge ahead and enjoy, maybe a friend or two, or to get to that point. I cannot tell you enough thanks to the Senior Planet in Colorado, and more particularly to Judy Ruff for this opportunity. It has given me life, and for that I will be forever grateful, and I can hardly wait to get down there, moving forward. But again, I have a conflict between enjoying change for many years and now being powerless or not being able to change my mindset. And I'm going to have to take much of what you said today to heart, and I thank you.
Is there a handout that we can have access to? I think.
Yes, actually, if you put your email into the chat, I send a follow-up email from these meetings, and so I will send that to you.
Oh, thank you.
You're very welcome. Any other comments?
Well, this is Lois,
Go ahead, Lois.
and I think change somehow makes you stronger. I know some people that have lived in the same house their whole life, and I've moved so many times I can't count them, and I feel like it's a challenge, and I heard a phrase, feel the fear and do it anyway. But once you overcome the challenge and you say, well, I did that, now I can do this. This is more difficult than that was. So I think in some ways it makes you such a stronger person if you can adapt to it and get through it.
Yeah, Lois, you're so right. I also have moved and lived all over the country. And if you equate moving to this type of change, right? We've moved into a whole new
Environment.
normal is the word, right? But a whole new circumstance, right? And so one of the things that I did every time we moved, and it's so funny, it just dawned on me, Jane, when you were talking about ritual, is that you kind of mourn what you lost, but then if you establish a new ritual or tradition in the new set of circumstances, you know, that's positive and really feels good, you sort of identify that triumphantly as a, you know, a great way to move forward. Just as simple as, you know, if you came like I did from the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area and you mourned your bagels and pizza and another place, you know, something else that, you know, or you went to a certain place and you can't do that anymore, and then you find something else. And I think that, you know, and it's within our creativity, you know, we have to draw out those things, you know, and look inward and say, you know, what can I do that's different?
Yeah, a new ritual, right?
New experience.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, this was wonderful, Jane. I just
thank you, Jane
great.
and Judy.
Absolutely phenomenal.
The doctor ordered for us, and we've
It's for me.
This is
Thank
the way
you.
we say that we love you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
I appreciate.
Judy.
I'm a coffee bean, but I'm a coffee bean really. I'm from Colombia, and I'm being here in this country. I was 17 years old by myself, so I know what is a hard life. And every day you have to face it. It's a new day, and be happy. Don't worry.
Right. Oh, I love it.
I like that.
So Anna, you're going to be our Colombian coffee bean.
Yes, yes. And you need to use a mask, 2 masks, 3 masks, get it. And go out and enjoy whatever life it is. Thank you very much. You give me
That's wonderful.
push up.
Judy, when you said you recorded this and you'll share it with us, are we permitted then when we get it to share it with any friends that we would like, or what is your feeling on that?
That's okay with you, Jane?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Share away.
All right, because I would like to share that with a couple, in addition to my son.
Yeah, when I send you the handout, you'll get the recording as well.
Okay.
So
Great,
you get
great.
the whole shoot match from us. So I just want to, again, thank you, Jane. Oh, my heart is so full. I'm so grateful to you.
Yes.
And you
Yeah.
did cry.
Yeah.
Did you cry?
I
Yes.
did cry. I did cry.
Oh.
It always makes me cry. But
That's a good marketing tagline. I bring people to tears.
yes, I've witnessed. I've been in person with her, and everybody's sniffling. Okay, well, listen. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and
Thank you, Judy.
listen to that
Thank you.
recording again whenever you need it. So
Very blessed weekend.
yes, that's right. It's Friday. Have a great weekend.
It is.
everybody.
Yes.
Right.
Have a great.
And the next,
Bye.
and next
Thank
week
you for
will
the
be,
presentation.
it's a new month.
Gracias.
Okay,
But
remember,
at least we get Monday
new
again
month next week.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.